I watched from my kitchen window as the bulldozers rolled toward my century-old barn, the same red barn where my grandfather had stored his first harvest, the same barn where my father had taught me to drive, the same barn where I had proposed to my wife 15 years ago. Karen Mitchell stood beside the demolition crew with her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. She pointed directly at my family heritage and gave the signal. The engine roared to life. The massive steel blade bit into weathered wood that had withstood 100 winters. My hands shook as I gripped the window sill. 3 generations of memories were about to become a pile of splinters. All because an HOA that I never joined decided my property did not meet their luxury standards. But as I watched my barn fall, something else was rising inside me. A cold fury that would soon teach Karen Mitchell and her HOA exactly what happens when you destroy the wrong person's heritage. That morning, I had no idea I was about to turn their $5 million resort into the biggest wheat storage facility in 3 counties. My name is David, and I inherited 40 acres of pure heaven from my grandfather when I was 28 years old. The property sat in what used to be the heart of farm country, surrounded by rolling fields and split-rail fences that stretched as far as you could see. The centerpiece of everything was the red barn. Built in 1923 by my great-grandfather's own hands, it stood like a monument to honest work and family tradition. Every board was hand-cut. Every nail was driven with purpose. The smell of hay and old wood filled your lungs the moment you stepped inside. My wife Sarah and I raised our 2 kids on that land. Weekend mornings meant pancakes on the porch while watching the sunrise paint the fields gold. Summer evenings meant fireflies dancing around the barn while we hosted barbecues for half the county. The barn served as our community center, our wedding venue for friends, and our shelter during storms. I ran a small organic farming operation that supplied 3 farmers markets in town. Nothing fancy, just good honest vegetables grown in soil that had been in my family for generations. Our tomatoes won ribbons at the county fair. Our corn maze brought families from 4 counties every October. Life was simple. Life was good. Life was exactly what I had always dreamed it would be. Then the surveyors showed up. I was feeding the chickens on a Tuesday morning when I noticed orange stakes appearing along my property line. Bright plastic flags fluttered in the breeze like warning signals. I walked over to investigate and found official notices tied to each stake. The papers made no sense at first. Legal language about zoning changes and property assessments, but one phrase jumped out at me like a slap in the face. Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I had never heard of Willowbrook Estates. I certainly had never joined any homeowners association, but according to these documents, I was now subject to their rules and regulations. That afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled into my gravel driveway. The car looked completely out of place next to my pickup truck and farming equipment. A woman in her 50s stepped out wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "You must be David," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. We need to talk." Karen had perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. She looked at my barn like it was a disease that needed to be cured. "Your property has some issues that need immediate attention," she said, pulling out a clipboard thick with documents. "That barn is not up to our community standards. The paint is peeling. The roof needs work. Frankly, it is an eyesore that brings down property values for everyone." I stared at her in disbelief. This is my family farm. That barn has been here for 100 years. What does any of this have to do with you?" Karen's smile grew wider and colder. "Oh, David, you have so much to learn about how things work now. Your property is part of our planned community whether you like it or not. We have standards to maintain." She handed me a thick packet of papers. Violation notices, architectural guidelines, fee schedules, penalty structures. Page after page of rules I had never agreed to follow. "You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance," Karen said as she walked back to her Mercedes. "After that, we start issuing fines. Trust me, you do not want to find out how expensive noncompliance can be." I stood in my driveway holding those papers as her car disappeared down the road. The sun was setting behind my barn, casting long shadows across the land my family had worked for generations. Something told me that the peaceful life I had built was about to change forever. I just had no idea how brutal that change would be. I spent the next week buried in legal documents, trying to understand how an HOA could suddenly claim authority over my property. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Karen Mitchell and her development company had been planning this takeover for 2 years. They had quietly purchased every piece of land surrounding my farm, then used their political connections to redraw the zoning maps. Through a series of backdoor deals with county officials, they had managed to reclassify my agricultural land as part of their residential development. The worst part was the timing. Every crucial vote had happened during agricultural seasons when farmers like me were too busy working to attend county meetings. Every public notice had been printed in legal sections of newspapers that nobody read. They had designed the entire process to fly under our radar. My property taxes told the story perfectly. For 20 years, I had paid agricultural rates on farmland assessed at $3,000 per acre. Suddenly, without warning, my assessment jumped to $15,000 per acre at residential luxury rates. My annual tax bill went from $4,000 to $32,000 overnight. The first official violation notice arrived by certified mail on a Friday morning. My barn was now classified as a non-conforming structure that violated architectural standards for the Willowbrook Estates community. I had 90 days to either demolish it or renovate it to meet their luxury home guidelines. The renovation requirements were insane. New foundation, new roof, new siding that matched their approved color palette, new windows with specific glass specifications. The estimated cost was over $200,000 to bring a perfectly functional barn up to their suburban luxury standards. I hired a lawyer immediately. Tom Patterson had handled my grandfather's estate and knew our family's history with the land. He spent 3 days reviewing the HOA documents before delivering devastating news. "David, I am sorry, but they have you trapped," Tom said, shaking his head as he closed the file. "Every technical requirement has been met. Every legal procedure has been followed. The county officials who approved this have connections to Karen Mitchell's development company, but everything was done within the bounds of the law." I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every direction I turned led to another dead end. The county commissioners who could overturn the zoning changes were the same ones who had approved them in the first place. The appeals process required fees I could not afford and timelines that worked in favor of the HOA. Karen Mitchell seemed to enjoy watching me struggle. She started showing up at my property for compliance inspections without warning, sometimes twice a week, always with her clipboard and her cold smile. "The paint on your barn is peeling worse," she would say, making notes. "That is another violation, And I noticed some weeds growing along your fence line. Community standards require maintained landscaping. Each violation came with a fine: $50 per day for peeling paint, $25 per day for unmaintained landscaping, $75 per day for agricultural equipment visible from the road. The penalties were designed to bankrupt me slowly but surely. I tried reasoning with the other HOA board members, hoping to find someone with common sense. But every single board member had financial ties to Karen's development company. They were investors, not neighbors. They saw my farm as an obstacle to their profit margins, not as a family heritage worth preserving. The breaking point came when I received a notice that daily fines would increase to $500 per day if I did not begin compliance work within 30 days. At that rate, they could take my property within 6 months through lien foreclosure proceedings. I sat at my kitchen table that night, surrounded by legal documents and financial calculations. Sarah held my hand while we both stared at numbers that made no sense. How could a century of family ownership be wiped out by people we had never met making rules we had never agreed to follow? That was when I realized this had never been about community standards or property values. This was about forcing me to sell my land so Karen Mitchell could expand her luxury development. My 40 acres were the missing piece she needed for her grand vision. My barn stood in the way of her resort entrance. My farming operation did not fit her suburban paradise. My family heritage was nothing more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. But I was not going to make it easy for her. If Karen Mitchell wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The demolition notice arrived on a Monday morning with 48 hours warning. Despite my ongoing legal appeals and desperate attempts to file emergency injunctions, Karen Mitchell had scheduled the destruction of my barn for Wednesday at dawn. I spent Tuesday night in the barn for the last time, walking among the farming equipment my grandfather had maintained with religious care, running my hands along workbenches where 3 generations had repaired broken tools and built new dreams. The smell of hay and motor oil and honest work filled my lungs like a benediction. Sarah found me there at midnight, sitting on an old wooden crate where my father used to tell stories about the old days. She did not say anything. She just sat beside me and held my hand while we listened to the barn settling in the night breeze. "They cannot take away what this place means to us," she whispered. "But they could take away the place itself." Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold. I stood on my front porch with my coffee mug, watching the demolition crew set up their equipment. Karen Mitchell arrived in her Mercedes at exactly 7 a.m., wearing sunglasses and carrying her ever-present clipboard. She walked directly to the foreman and pointed at my barn. "I want this done quickly and completely. No delays, no interruptions." The bulldozer operator looked uncomfortable. He was a local guy who had probably grown up seeing this barn every day on his way to school. But a job was a job, and Karen Mitchell was paying his wages. I wanted to run out there and throw myself in front of the bulldozer. I wanted to chain myself to the barn doors like some kind of environmental activist. But Tom Patterson had warned me that any interference would result in criminal charges and give Karen even more legal ammunition against me. So I stood there helplessly and watched my heritage die. The first bite of the bulldozer blade into century-old wood sounded like a scream. Boards that had weathered 100 winters splintered like matchsticks. The roof that had sheltered 4 generations of my family collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. My father drove up just as the walls came down. He was 82 years old and had not cried since my mother's funeral 10 years earlier. but tears streamed down his cheeks as he watched his childhood playground reduced to rubble. "I carved my initials in that beam right there," he said, pointing to a piece of wood disappearing under the bulldozer tracks. "I was 8 years old and my father tanned my hide for it, but he never made me sand it off." The demolition took less than 2 hours. A century of memories became a pile of broken wood and twisted metal that could fit in 3 dump trucks. Karen Mitchell supervised every moment to make sure I could not salvage anything meaningful. Within an hour of the last truck leaving, a landscaping crew arrived to plant expensive shrubs and decorative flowers where my barn had stood. They even installed a small sign that read, "Future site of Willowbrook Estates Resort and Spa." The final insult came in the mail 3 days later. An invoice from the HOA for property improvement services in the amount of $12,000. I was being billed for the demolition of my own family heritage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. I had spent 3 months fighting Karen Mitchell with lawyers and legal procedures and civilized appeals to reason. None of it had worked. Traditional legal channels had failed completely. The system was designed to protect wealth and connections over individual rights. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to create it myself. I opened my laptop and began researching everything I could find about Karen Mitchell, her development company, and the Willowbrook Estates project. If they wanted to play hardball, I was about to show them what a desperate farmer could accomplish when he had nothing left to lose. I transformed my kitchen table into a command center of revenge. Laptop computer, stacks of public records, legal documents, financial reports, a wall map showing every property in the Willowbrook Estates development. If Karen Mitchell wanted to destroy my life with paperwork, I was going to return the favor. My first breakthrough came from the county recorder's office. Public records showed that the Willowbrook Estates project was much bigger than anyone realized. Karen's development company had plans for a $5 million luxury resort complex complete with golf course, spa facilities, conference center, and upscale dining. But the really interesting part was the timeline. Construction loans had been approved based on projected property values that included my 40 acres as the main resort entrance and parking facility. Karen Mitchell had borrowed millions of dollars against land she did not even own yet. I dug deeper into the financial structure and found something that made my pulse quicken. Karen Mitchell was not just the HOA president. She was the primary investor in the resort development, with over $2 million of her own money at risk. This explained everything: the aggressive timeline, the brutal tactics, the complete disregard for legal niceties. Karen was not just trying to improve community standards. She was trying to save her own financial empire. But the best discovery came at 3 a.m. on a Friday night, when I was deep in the County Planning Commission records. Environmental impact studies for the resort development revealed that the entire project would violate federal wetland protection laws. The resort construction would require draining a seasonal wetland that served as habitat for protected bird species. The Environmental Protection Agency had never been notified about the project because Karen's company had deliberately filed permits during different seasons to avoid triggering federal review. I printed out every document I could find and started building a case file that would make a federal prosecutor smile. But I was just getting started. My investigation into the HOA board members revealed a web of conflicts of interest that would make a politician blush. Board member Robert Hayes had purchased 3 investment properties in the development before the zoning changes were announced. Board member Patricia Williams worked for the same real estate company that was handling resort sales. Board member Michael Thompson was Karen Mitchell's brother-in-law. Not one single board member was an actual resident of the Willowbrook Estates community. They were all investors and business partners who had installed themselves as the governing authority for their own financial benefit. I started documenting meetings between HOA board members and county officials, using public calendar records and campaign contribution reports. Karen Mitchell had donated the maximum legal amount to the election campaigns of 3 county commissioners, the same 3 commissioners who had voted to approve the zoning changes. Commissioner Janet Phillips had received a $5,000 campaign contribution from Karen's development company just 2 weeks before the crucial zoning vote. Commissioner Mike Bradley had been hired as a consultant for the resort project at $30,000 annually. The pattern was clear. Karen Mitchell had purchased the political support she needed to steal my land through a combination of campaign contributions, consulting contracts, and strategic board appointments. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. My neighbor Bill Jackson had security cameras that covered part of the county road near my property. When I asked to review footage from the night before the zoning vote, we discovered something amazing. Karen Mitchell and 2 county commissioners had met in the parking lot of a closed restaurant at 11 p.m. to discuss strategy. The meeting lasted 45 minutes and included the exchange of documents. All of this happened 12 hours before the public vote that would change my life forever. I had them dead to rights on corruption charges, but I needed more than just evidence. I needed a strategy that would destroy their entire operation and give me the justice I deserved. That strategy came to me during Sunday morning church service. Pastor Williams was preaching about David and Goliath, and how sometimes the smallest person can bring down the mightiest giant with the right weapon and the courage to use it. Karen Mitchell thought she was untouchable because she had money and political connections. But she had built her empire on a foundation of lies and legal shortcuts. All I had to do was expose the truth and let federal law enforcement handle the rest. I spent the rest of that Sunday afternoon planning the most satisfying revenge in the history of HOA disputes. Karen Mitchell had destroyed my barn, but I was about to destroy her entire world. Monday morning, I filed my first federal lawsuit, not against the HOA, but against the resort development for violating environmental protection laws. The Environmental Protection Agency received a formal complaint with 30 pages of documentation showing illegal wetland destruction and protected species habitat violations. By Wednesday, EPA investigators were crawling all over the resort construction site with soil samples and measuring equipment. All construction activity ground to a halt while federal agencies conducted their investigation. Karen Mitchell called me that afternoon screaming. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she demanded. "You are interfering with a legitimate business operation." "I am protecting federal wetlands," I replied calmly. "You know, those environmental protection laws that you forgot to follow when you were rushing to steal my property." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted almost 10 seconds. When Karen spoke again, her voice was ice cold. "You have no idea what you have started, David. I will destroy you." "You already tried that," I said. "Now it is my turn." Thursday morning, I walked into the FBI field office in the state capitol with my entire case file. The Public Integrity Unit specializes in political corruption cases, and they were very interested in my documentation of the meetings between Karen Mitchell and county commissioners. Special Agent Maria Santos reviewed my evidence for 2 hours before calling in her supervisor. By the end of the day, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into political corruption in my county government. Friday afternoon, I met with investigative reporter Jennifer Walsh from the state newspaper. Jennifer had won awards for exposing political corruption, and she immediately recognized the potential for a major story. "This is bigger than just your property dispute," Jennifer said as she reviewed my documentation. "This is about how wealthy developers can use political connections to steamroll over individual property rights. Our readers need to know about this." The first newspaper article ran on Sunday morning with the headline, "HOA Power Grab: How One Developer Used Political Connections to Seize Family Farm." The article included photos of my demolished barn, alongside documentation of Karen Mitchell's campaign contributions and business relationships with county officials. My phone started ringing immediately. Other property owners who had been victimized by similar HOA tactics, lawyers who specialized in property rights cases, television reporters who wanted to interview me for the evening news. But the most important call came from the state attorney general's office. They wanted to coordinate their investigation with the federal authorities to make sure Karen Mitchell faced both state and federal charges for her corruption. Monday morning, I filed my second strategic move. Using agricultural protection laws that I had discovered during my research, I reclassified my entire property as a working farm operation. This made future HOA interference nearly impossible and gave me legal protections that Karen Mitchell had never considered. The agricultural protection filing also allowed me to form a coalition with other farmers in the area who were facing similar pressure from development interests. We created a nonprofit organization called Farmers Against Corporate Seizure and started attracting media attention from agricultural publications and rural advocacy groups. Tuesday afternoon, Karen Mitchell tried one last desperate intimidation tactic. She showed up at my property with 2 lawyers and a county sheriff deputy, demanding access to inspect for additional violations. "I have a court order," she announced, waving a piece of paper. "You cannot refuse legal compliance inspections." I smiled and handed her my own piece of paper. "And I have agricultural protection status. Your HOA has no authority over working farm operations. You can inspect all you want from the public road." The look on Karen's face was worth every moment of the hell she had put me through. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she was the one who looked defeated and helpless. But I was just getting started with my revenge. Wednesday morning, construction crews stopped showing up at the resort site. Word was spreading through the building community that the Willowbrook Estates project was under multiple federal investigations. No contractor wanted to risk their business license working on a potentially illegal development. Thursday morning, Karen's construction lenders started asking uncomfortable questions about project delays and federal investigations. When banks get nervous about environmental violations and political corruption, construction loans get very expensive very quickly. By Friday afternoon, the entire Willowbrook Estates project was in complete chaos. Construction had stopped. Federal investigators were interviewing county officials. Newspaper reporters were asking questions about every aspect of Karen Mitchell's business operations. I sat on my front porch that evening, watching the sunset over the empty lot where my barn used to stand. But for the first time in months, I was not angry about what I had lost. I was excited about what I was going to win. The FBI raids happened on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Federal agents with search warrants hit Karen Mitchell's office, her home, and the offices of 3 county commissioners simultaneously. Local television crews captured footage of boxes of documents being carried out under armed guard. Karen Mitchell was arrested on charges of conspiracy, mail fraud, and violation of federal environmental protection laws. The perp walk footage showed her in handcuffs being loaded into a federal marshal's vehicle, while reporters shouted questions about the Willowbrook Estates corruption scandal. But the really devastating news came that afternoon. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence that Karen had been embezzling money from HOA dues to finance her personal investment in the resort project. Homeowners who had paid thousands of dollars in fees discovered that their money had been illegally diverted to Karen's private business ventures. The federal judge overseeing the case froze all assets related to the Willowbrook Estates project pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Construction loans were called immediately. Investment partnerships dissolved overnight. Karen Mitchell's financial empire collapsed like a house of cards, which created an opportunity I had been planning for months. The resort property went to bankruptcy auction on a Thursday morning in November. Thanks to the legal chaos I had orchestrated, there were very few qualified bidders. Environmental violations made the property toxic to most developers. Federal investigations scared away legitimate investors. I walked into that auction with financing I had arranged through agricultural development loans and a coalition of local farmers who wanted to prevent future corporate land grabs. Our bid was simple and strategic. We offered exactly what the property was worth for agricultural use, not luxury development. We won the auction for $1.8 million, less than half of what Karen Mitchell had originally paid for the land, and a fraction of the $5 million she had planned to make from the resort development. The moment I signed the final purchase documents, I walked outside and called the local newspaper. I am converting the entire Willowbrook Estates resort property into the largest agricultural processing and storage facility in 3 counties, I announced. We will be constructing grain silos, equipment barns, and feed processing centers to serve the farming community. The reaction from former HOA members was immediate and hilarious. They had spent 2 years fighting to keep agricultural operations away from their luxury homes. Now they were going to be living next door to exactly the kind of industrial farming operation they had tried to prevent. But here was the beautiful part. Under the same zoning laws that Karen Mitchell had used to attack my property, my agricultural operation was now classified as a conforming use that met all community standards. The HOA's own architectural guidelines required neighboring properties to accept my farming improvements as legitimate business operations. I started construction immediately. The luxury clubhouse became a feed processing center with truck loading docks and grain elevators. The golf course became equipment storage yards with maintenance barns for combined harvesters and tractors. The resort's swimming pool was filled with concrete and converted into a grain washing facility. The tennis courts became parking areas for agricultural vehicles. Every single luxury amenity was transformed into practical farming infrastructure that served the real needs of our rural community. The former Willowbrook Estates residents tried to fight back through the same HOA procedures that had been used against me, but I had learned their game better than they had. Every permit was properly filed. Every architectural standard was technically met. Every legal requirement was satisfied to the letter. When they complained about noise from grain processing equipment, I pointed out that agricultural operations were specifically exempted from residential noise ordinances. When they complained about truck traffic, I showed them transportation permits that allowed commercial agricultural vehicles on community roads. When they threatened to sue, I reminded them that I now owned the majority of property in their development and could vote to change any HOA rule I did not like. The final insult came when I sent each former HOA member an invoice for community improvement assessments to help pay for the agricultural infrastructure that was increasing their property values by connecting them to the regional farming economy. Some of them actually paid it. Karen Mitchell pled guilty to federal corruption charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison plus restitution payments that would keep her broke for the rest of her life. 3 county commissioners lost their jobs and faced their own criminal charges. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 months later with the headline, "From Resort to Grain Storage: How One Farmer Turned the Tables on HOA Bullies." The article included aerial photos showing my thriving agricultural operation, surrounded by expensive homes whose owners had learned to respect property rights. But the sweetest victory was personal. I used part of the resort's conference center to build a new red barn, bigger than the original, better than the original, a monument to the idea that family heritage and individual rights will always triumph over corporate greed and institutional bullying. 2 years later, my agricultural operation has become the economic heart of our rural community. The grain storage facility serves 47 local farms. The Equipment Maintenance Center provides services for 3 counties. The feed processing plant supplies organic livestock operations across the entire region. What started as revenge has become something much more valuable, a sustainable business that supports family farming and rural communities. My annual revenue is 3 times what Karen Mitchell's resort would have generated, and every dollar goes to people who actually work the land instead of developers who exploit it. The former Willowbrook Estates residents have adapted better than I expected. Most of them have discovered that living next to a working farm operation is actually quite peaceful. The morning sounds of agricultural equipment are less annoying than suburban leaf blowers. The smell of hay and grain is more pleasant than suburban lawn chemicals. Some of the younger families have even started buying their vegetables from our expanded farmers market operation. Their children love watching the harvest equipment and learning about where their food actually comes from. Karen Mitchell was released from federal prison last month. I heard she is working at a retail store in another state, trying to rebuild her life under the weight of federal restitution payments that will follow her for decades. I do not feel sorry for her. She made her choices. She decided that her profit was more important than my heritage. She discovered that actions have consequences. The legal precedent from our case has helped protect other family farms from similar HOA attacks. Agricultural protection laws have been strengthened. Property rights advocacy groups use our story as an example of how individual citizens can fight back against institutional oppression. My property has become a case study in law schools and agricultural colleges. Students learn about the importance of understanding legal systems and using those systems to protect individual rights against corporate interests. But the most important lesson is simpler than any legal strategy or business plan. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. Sometimes you have to risk everything to protect what matters most. My grandfather built that original red barn with his own hands because he believed in honest work and family legacy. I built this new agricultural operation with the same values, just with better legal protection. The land my great-grandfather cleared is still producing food and supporting families. The heritage that Karen Mitchell tried to destroy has grown stronger than ever. The community that she tried to exclude me from has welcomed agricultural operations as neighbors and partners. Every morning, I walk through my grain storage facility and remember the sound of my barn falling under Karen Mitchell's bulldozers. But I also remember the sound of justice being served when her empire crumbled under the weight of her own corruption. That is the sound of America working the way it is supposed to work. That is the sound of individual rights triumphing over institutional bullying. That is the sound of honest people building something better from the ashes of what was destroyed.